The Ohio River runs 981 miles from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, down to Cairo, Illinois, where it joins the Mississippi. It is the second largest river in the country by volume. Its basin pulls water from parts of 15 states, and under regular conditions, it carries half of all the water that moves through the lower Mississippi. Half, not a minor share, not backup flow. Half of the most critical commercial waterway on the continent relies on the Ohio showing up every single day. In the late summer of 2025, it stopped showing up. A drought had been spreading through the Ohio River basin for months. Not the kind of drought that makes front pages, the quiet kind, the kind that builds slowly while attention is pointed somewhere else. By mid-September, the Ohio was no longer moving half the Mississippi's total volume south. It was moving 8%, not a rounding error, not a misread sensor, 8%. The river that normally carries half the downstream system had nearly dropped out of the picture entirely. Then winter hit, and it did not fix anything. It made everything harder. By early February, the Army Corps of Engineers was tracking Ohio River flows near 20,000 cubic feet per second. The usual flow for that time of year sits around 400,000 cubic feet per second. When officials from the Army Corps told reporters this was something they had not seen before, a collision of extreme cold and extreme low water hitting at the same time, they were not being dramatic. Two separate problems had arrived together, and each one made the other harder to manage. When a river slows that much, it stops acting like a river. It becomes heavy and still. And when the air turned cold, that stillness froze over. Ice packed into the lock chambers at Willow Island so completely that the miter gates could not shut. 16 workers pulled shifts around the clock, clearing ice by hand just to keep the lock running. Wait times at that single point on the river stretched to nearly 3 days. Out on the water, barge operators faced a situation that no manual had prepared them for. They decoupled from their barges, stepped out, pushed walls of ice aside with their hands, reconnected, and kept going because the water was too shallow and too slow to move the ice on its own. These were not disaster response teams. These were regular workers doing a regular job on a river that had stopped behaving like one. The ice was something you could see. The low water was something you could see. What was forming beneath the surface was not visible yet. Cincinnati pulls 88% of its drinking water straight from the Ohio River. Not a portion of it. Not a secondary line. 88%. A city of 300,000 people has built its entire water system around one source, and that source had just run at 5% of its normal level. That is not a near miss. That is a city standing on the edge of something very serious. Cincinnati is not out there alone on that edge. Louisville draws from the same river and serves close to 1 million people through that single supply. Huntington, Parkersburg, Wheeling, Evansville, and Paducah all pull their water from the Ohio as well. Across 29 public water systems and the communities they serve, 5 million people wake up every morning and turn on a tap that goes back to that one river. 5 million people. All of them tied to water that had dropped to 5% of normal. 5% is not an abstract number. Water treatment plants are built around predictable volumes. Intake equipment is tuned to a river that moves with weight and depth. When the water drops, the concentration of everything already in it goes up. Pollutants, sediment, biological material that a full-flowing river would break apart and push downstream instead settle and collect. The river stops doing its own cleaning. And every city pulling from it has to spend more, push harder, and hope its infrastructure can make up for what the river is no longer doing naturally. Paducah, Kentucky, at the junction of the Ohio and the Tennessee, recorded its driest winter in more than 130 years of record keeping, more than a century of data, and this was the bottom of it. That number is not sitting alone. It is part of the same drought, the same failing system, the same 5% river cutting all the way to the end of the Ohio Valley and breaking records at every point along the way. Drinking water is not the only thing at risk. 2 nuclear reactors at the Beaver Valley Power Station in Pennsylvania draw their cooling water directly from the Ohio. The same river running at 5% of capacity was also the river keeping those reactors from overheating. The dependency does not end at the kitchen faucet. It runs through power systems, factories, and supply chains that most people never consider until something stops working. This is what a civilization looks like when it was built on a single assumption that the water would always be there. Cincinnati made that assumption. So did Louisville. So did every city along 981 miles of river. A parent fills a glass of water for their child. None of that history comes out of the tap, just whatever is left of it. Here is something most people do not know about rivers and dams. When the water passing through a dam system drops far enough, the dam stops doing what it was built to do. It stops managing a moving river. Instead, it starts creating something else. A sequence of standing pools, still water sitting between concrete walls, warming under the sun, collecting everything the current used to carry away. An environmental scientist at Orsanco, the Ohio River Valley Water Sanitation Commission, described it plainly. When rain stops, the river slows. The dams hold water back for navigation. And the river starts to look less like a river and more like a chain of lakes, and lakes grow algae. That is not a figure of speech. That is what happened. In August 2025, Orsanco investigators found green water stretching from Markland Dam all the way to Paducah. Not trace amounts, not a lab reading, visible green water, microcystis colonies, toxic blue-green algae spreading across one of the most important freshwater systems in the country in plain sight. Dissolved oxygen at Markland dropped to 3.82 milligrams per liter. The point where fish start to suffocate is not far below that number. The river was not just running low. It was running out of the chemistry that keeps living things alive inside it. This had happened before. In 2019, a toxic blue-green bloom spread across a 300-mile stretch of the Ohio and pushed Louisville water into 6 straight weeks of continuous treatment. 6 weeks around the clock, pulling drinking water from a poisoned source. That event was treated as a crisis, an exception, something to recover from and move past. But the conditions that made the 2019 bloom possible did not go away. They became the new normal. In Cadiz, Ohio, a small town in Harrison County, residents lived under a boil water notice for more than a month after the drought and flood cycle cracked the concrete filters inside a treatment plant that was already struggling. A local woman named Stacy Greer started filling gallon jugs at her own sink and testing the pH herself, not because she had any professional training for it, because nobody else was doing it. A consultant eventually came out, assessed the damage, and estimated repairs at over $2 million. Cadiz does not have $2 million. The water coming out of the tap is still not right. That is what a river turning into a chain of lakes looks like at ground level. Not a nature film. A woman testing her own water alone, waiting for help that has not arrived. 20 miles east of Cincinnati, on the Ohio River floodplain in Pierce Township, sits a former coal-fired power station called the Walter C. Beckjord facility. It shut down years ago. The smokestacks went quiet. The operation ended. But what it left behind did not go anywhere. 6 million cubic yards of coal fly ash sitting in unlined ponds directly upstream from the wells that supply drinking water to 130,000 people. 6 million cubic yards is not a small spill in a corner of a property. It is a permanent mass built from decades of industrial waste, sitting in the ground with nothing between it and the surrounding soil except the belief that the water table would stay where it had always been. That belief no longer holds. Coal ash carries lead, mercury, and arsenic, not in trace amounts that take sensitive equipment to find, in concentrations that cause serious damage to the human body. And during drought to flood cycles, when groundwater levels swing hard between extremes, the pressure from those swings pushes contaminants through the ash and into the aquifer below. The drought pulls the water table down. The flood drives it back up. Each swing moves the contamination closer to the wells. The local township trustee did not use soft language when asked about this. He said it plainly, that pollution is sitting there right next to your water, and it should frighten everyone. He is right. And the problem is not contained to Pierce Township. The Beckjord site is one example of a pattern that runs the entire length of the Ohio River's industrial corridor. Closed plants, unlined ponds, decades of contamination sitting in floodplains that were never built to hold what was dumped in them. The river's history as an industrial artery means its banks are lined with what a century of manufacturing left behind, and most of it was never fully cleaned up. The damage downstream tells the same story at a larger scale. For the 3rd year running, the Army Corps of Engineers built an underwater sill near New Orleans specifically to block saltwater pushing in from the Gulf of Mexico. When the Ohio runs dry, the Mississippi loses volume, and without enough freshwater pressure moving south, the Gulf moves north. The contamination does not stay in one place. It travels with the current, or in this case with the absence of one, all the way to the bottom of the continent. The river connects everything, and everything the river touches is now touched by what was left upstream. The Ohio River is not just a waterway, it is a highway, one that moves between 179 and 225 million tons of cargo every single year. Fuel, chemicals, grain, raw materials, finished goods, the physical backbone of American industry flowing up and down this corridor in volumes most people never see. A single 15-barge tow moving down the Ohio carries the same load as 1,050 trucks. The river does not supplement the road system in the American interior. In many places, it replaces it. The economic weight behind that is enormous. The Ohio River's inland waterway system alone generates $23.2 billion each year and supports 130,000 jobs. That is not the full Mississippi network. That is one river, one corridor. And when that corridor breaks down, the cost is not limited to the people living along the banks. It spreads. The river ran low. Barge operators did not stop working. They adjusted the way people adjust when the alternative is losing everything. They cut tow sizes by 14%. They dropped draft depths to 10 feet 6 inches, as close to the riverbed as they could get without running aground. They kept going because the industry does not have an off switch, but moving slower with smaller loads through shallower water means moving less. And moving less means the system feeding American commerce starts falling behind. The last time the Mississippi network locked up from drought conditions was 2022, a single autumn. The economic loss that season was estimated at $20 billion. 2,000 barges backed up along the river system. The round-trip transit time from New Orleans to Cairo, normally 14 days, stretched to 27. Grain shipments heading south collapsed by 79%. Farmers watched their harvests sit in storage while the cost of moving them made the math impossible. That was one season, one bad autumn on a failing river. This is now the fourth breakdown in 5 years. The infrastructure holding the Ohio River together was not built for this. The lock and dam system was completed in 1929. It is nearly 100 years old. 20 facilities maintain the minimum 9-foot navigation depth across the full length of the river. Some of the components keeping those facilities running are so outdated that replacement parts are no longer made anywhere on Earth. They do not exist. The operations manager at Markland Locks and Dams said it directly. Fuel, chemicals, grain, all of it moves through gates that were engineered for a climate that no longer exists. The river is the same structure. The climate around it is different. And the distance between those two facts grows wider every year. The crisis on the Ohio River did not arrive with a single loud moment. It built up slowly, steadily, in the soil of farms that had fed the same families for generations, in the barns of dairy operations hauling water by the thousands of gallons just to keep animals alive, and in the kitchens of people who had stopped trusting what came out of their taps. In northwest Ohio, soil moisture dropped to roughly 20%. The normal range sits between 40 and 50%. The state climatologist at Ohio State University called it a catastrophic soil recharge season. The phrase recharge season matters. It refers to the stretch of time when soil is supposed to soak up enough water to support crops through the dry months that follow. That window opened and closed, the soil stayed empty. At research farms in Wood County, moisture sensors confirmed what farmers already knew from looking at their land. The ground was not holding water. Second cut hay production fell to 25% of what it should have been. Dairy and hog operations that rely on consistent feed were trucking in thousands of gallons of water each week just to keep animals from dying. Not to grow, not to produce, just to survive. An Ohio State Extension agent in Wood County put the risk plainly. Without water deep in the soil, root systems cannot carry crops through a full growing season. Planting time was approaching. The ground was empty. The USDA declared 8 Ohio counties a natural disaster area. That declaration opens emergency loan programs and aid pathways, but it does not put destroyed crops back in the ground. It does not cover the cost of water hauled in by truck across months of dry weather. It does not return the income that disappeared while fields sat parched and the river ran at 5% of capacity. And Stacey Greer is still in Cadiz, still filling jugs, still testing pH at her own sink because the treatment plant that cracked under the pressure of drought and flood has not been repaired. The $2 million estimate is still sitting somewhere on a desk. The village still does not have the money. The water is still not right. She is not a scientist. She is not an emergency manager. She is a resident doing the work the system was supposed to handle because the system ran out of capacity before she did. 8 counties declared a disaster. 1 river failing. 5 million people downstream. And in a small town in Harrison County, one woman with a gallon jug under a tap she cannot bring herself to trust, waiting for an answer that has not come. The forecast shifted in March 2026. NOAA projected 2 to 5 inches of rain across the Ohio Valley. By March 10th, river flows had already climbed back to 130% of normal. Indiana announced severe weather and flood preparation week. The spring outlook from the NOAA Climate Prediction Center pointed toward above normal rainfall through May. La Niña was fading. Neutral conditions were expected by spring, with El Niño development possible by summer. On paper, the emergency was over. The river was back. The readings looked healthy, but those readings do not tell you what happens when heavy rain falls on ground that has been baked solid for months. It does not soak in. The soil is compressed, depleted, unable to absorb water at the rate it arrives. So it runs off fast across the surface, picking up everything in its path. Sediment. Farm chemicals. Whatever has been sitting in those unlined ash ponds upstream from Cincinnati's water supply, the river does not recover. It floods. And a flooded river running through contaminated floodplains is a different kind of emergency than a dry one. But it is still an emergency. This is not a forecast. It already happened. In April 2025, the Ohio River at Louisville crested at 36.63 feet. Normal pool sits around 12 feet. Less than a year after that crest, the same river was running at 5% of capacity. The swing between those two extremes, from 36 feet above normal pool to nearly nothing, happened inside 12 months. That is not a weather event. That is a new pattern. And the system built to manage the Ohio River was not designed for a river that moves this way. The Army Corps of Engineers' own climate study for the Ohio River Basin projects that after 2040, autumn minimum flows will drop between 25 and 35%, while spring peak floods grow stronger at the same time. Both extremes get worse simultaneously. The drought goes deeper, the floods grow larger, the period of stable, predictable flow in between gets shorter. The cycle does not ease, it tightens. Downstream, the Mississippi near Baton Rouge had already dropped 10 feet below average. The collapse does not hold its shape locally. It moves with the current all the way to the Gulf, touching every city, every port, and every water intake along the route. The river looks like it has recovered. The gauges are reading normal, but the soil is still dry below the surface. The ash ponds are still sitting upstream. The lock gates are still aging. And the next drought is already forming inside the forecast models, moving forward through data that most people will never look at. Cincinnati did not make a careless decision. It made the same decision every city along the Ohio made. The same decision that planners and engineers and municipal officials across generations made when the river was full and the future felt stable. They built around the water because the water was always there. That assumption held for more than a century. It is not holding anymore. A brief rebound in river flow does not fix what is broken underneath. It does not seal the coal ash ponds sitting upstream from 130,000 people's water supply. It does not replace the lock gates built for a climate that has already changed. It does not put moisture back into the soil farmers need before the planting season closes. It does not repair the cracked filters in Cadiz or deliver Stacey Greer a glass of water she can trust. The gauges moved. The underlying conditions did not. The Ohio River is the largest feeder of the Mississippi. It supplies half the water moving through the most important commercial waterway on the continent. 5 million people drink from it. Dozens of industries depend on it. And right now, beneath the surface of a river that appears to have bounced back, the soil is still dry, the infrastructure is still aging, and the next drought is already building in the models. Every city downstream made the same bet. The question is not whether the river will fail again. The data has already answered that. The question is whether anyone will be prepared when it does.